H is for Hawk, adaptation of a memoir by Helen MacDonald recounting the grief experienced after the loss of their father, the form of madness, as it's described, and the decision to buy and train a goshawk, famously, apparently, the most difficult bird to own and train. As Claire Foy said in that interview, Helen describes the goshawks as perfectly evolved psychopaths, yes. Which is a great phrase. Yeah. So, it's a challenge. More importantly, the goshawk is by nature a loner, an outsider, a misfit, not unlike Helen in this period. And as Claire Foy said, in the wake of Helen's father's death, Helen wants some of that distance, that lack of humanity, that disconnection, not to be weighed down by these overwhelming feelings of grief. And so Helen withdraws from society, from family, from the academia of Cambridge, around which Helen now wanders with a perfectly evolved psychopath on her arm. And increasingly, the connection that Helen has is to Mabel, the bird. It's pointed out that the meaner the bird, the sweeter the name. So the fact that the bird is called Mabel tells you something. And really, the only moments that Helen comes to life is when Mabel is flying and hunting, and you're living literally in the moment, second by second, and everything else goes away. Now, I have to say, I really like the film, and because they're both out at the same time, and because you've already made the comparison, because you've said that there's the bird issue in Hamnet. I like this film much more than Hamnet, and it's not just because it gets the bird stuff right, and it's not just because of the breaststroke. That's a reference to the thing from Hamnet, yes, that apparently Paul Mescal is doing the wrong swimming. See previous review. The thing I like about H is for Hawk is that it has a toughness, a lack of sentimentality, a touch of grit under its fingernails. It's directed by Philippa Lothorpe, who came on the MK3D show that I do at the BFI, and talked really eloquently about the film. Philippa Lothorpe has a background in documentaries. He's perhaps best known more recently for directing the very powerful miniseries Three Girls about the child abuse scandal in Rochdale. So Philippa Lothorpe knows about capturing reality and also knows about dealing with the darker side of the human experience. Philippa Lothorpe co-wrote the script with Emma Donoghue, who wrote the book of Room. And I think they do a very good job of adapting a novel, which I've been since listening to on audiobook as read by, I think it's read by Helen MacDonald. And a lot of the book is internal monologue, kind of a lot of thought, a lot of this is what I'm thinking about nature. This is what I'm thinking about death. This is what I'm thinking about grief. There's a lot of internal monologuing. And in the film, rather than just doing swathes of voiceover, that conversation, that internal conversation is, I think, transferred into visual poetry in which the story and the meaning of the story is explained through the visuals. So Philip Lothorpe and Charlotte Bruce Christensen, who's the DP, took inspiration from a series of Polaroids taken by Tarkovsky, the film director, which combine, on the one hand, the softness of the image that you get from a Polaroid, but also that there's something quite stark and arresting and snapshotty about Polaroids. And I think you get that on screen, that there is both beauty, but there is also bite, there is harshness in there. The other thing that's doing the storytelling is a superb score by Emily Levianes-Farouche, who is one of my favorite composers. You'll recall I spoke about her doing the brilliant piano score for Only You. She did that amazing synth score for Censor, the Bronner Bailey Bond film. And here, I think that what her music does is get into that. I mean, she also did All of Us Strangers, which is great. But her music gets into that sense of yearning, that sense of longing, that, and also the sense of movement and flight, and the kind of conversation between the human element and the bird element. And I think that a lot of what's happening when they're taking out the internal monologuing and turning it into visual poetry, they're also turning it into musical poetry. And I really think that Emily Levianes-Farouche's score tells the story. As for Claire Foy, she's brilliant, not just because she's Claire Foy and she's brilliant, but because, as she says, she underplays it. She doesn't do what she referred to in that interview as mad acting, right? She plays everything down. She becomes, if anything, sort of slightly still. And again, it's interesting to compare this to Hamlet. I mean, Jessie Buckley is amazing in Hamlet and will very probably win Best Actress. And one of the reasons is because you can see the act, it's the full range of human emotions. There's real outpourings of grief and anger and all the rest of it. But I think there is an equal dexterity and an artistry in the restraint that Claire Foy demonstrates here by kind of shutting down. It's very hard to play a character who isn't expressive, who isn't communicative, who isn't particularly verbal. In the whole film, there's only one scene that struck a wrong chord for me, and that's the scene in which she does a lecture with the bird, and she's challenged by somebody in the room about, well, it's just cruelty, isn't it? You're taking the bird hunting, that's just cruelty. And the interesting thing about that scene is, I think in any other film it wouldn't have stood out, but it stood out for me in this because it actually felt dramatized. And I thought that what was really good about the rest of the film was it didn't. So even that criticism is actually a compliment to the way in which the rest of the film felt natural, and the rest of the shots of the bird, and it's not CG, the shots of the bird flying low through the trees are breathtaking. See it in the cinema because the visual poetry is amazing. But it feels like it's got talons. It feels like it's got bite to it, and it never falls into sentimentality or emotional pleading. It's the story tells itself, and it's told through the visuals and the performance and the music.